Welcome to the Egg Whisperer Show, a program exclusively designed to promote reproductive health awareness and discuss fertility preservation options. Here is your host, the Harvard-educated fertility specialist, Dr. Amy.
She's known as the Egg Whisperer.
Fertility expert Dr. Amy Vazadeh.
And you have yet another success story just launched by an East Bay fertility doctor.
Welcome to the Egg Whisperer Show. I have one of my dearest friends and my producer, Paula, on today's show with us. Thank you, Paula, for being here and joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's so fun to be on the show.
Yes, you're everything to me, and you're the reason, not to get too cheesy, but you're almost like the wind beneath my wings with all the things that I do and the messages that I'm trying to of hope that I tried to bring to everyone. So of course it makes sense that you have written this amazing book, How to Jumpstart Joy in Your Life. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So for people who just don't know you, and they really should, I want to share your bio and I'll just talk about you. You're on a mission to spread more joy in the world. You're a podcast producer, not just of mine, but including mine, and a certified life coach, and the author of Jumpstart Your Joy, Heart-Centered Ways to Find Joy in the Messy Middle. You're also the host of the Jumpstart Your Joy podcast, which launched in 2015 and has been on Apple Podcasts' new and noteworthy What's Hot and was Player FM's podcast of the day. You also hold a Master's of Arts in Religion from Yale Divinity School and was a project manager for digital marketing for 20 years, working with big clients like Visa, Clorox, Genentech, Nike, Xbox, and Dr. Amy. I'm just kidding. You're not only producer for this show, but a lot of people probably know this, and if you don't, now you do. We've known each other since middle school. So we were kids together growing up, so we really know each other very, very well, and I don't have any secrets. Nothing creepy, nothing dark.
Nope.
Nope. So welcome, Paula. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. And yes, the only thing that I can totally attest to about middle school is you are a singer. You were in the, what was it? The Beauty Shop Quartet.
Beauty Shop Quartet, that's right. I was, doing my little singing and dancing thing from a young age. Who knew that I would use those talents to sing about sperm and eggs? Okay, so I want to talk about you now. You've had an interesting trajectory. And I don't know about interesting is the right word. It's pretty fascinating and remarkable in your career and business paths. Can you tell us a bit about how you got into podcasting?
Sure. Yeah. And it is kind of one of those loop-de-loop type career paths. But for a really long time, I've been interested in stories of transformation and how people bring their creative vision into the world. And so I think that's kind of one of my through lines. But I did, as you mentioned, study religion, both undergrad and graduate school. Originally thought maybe I would be teaching religion, but then didn't really want to follow that path for various reasons. And found myself back here in the Bay Area being a project manager right during the .com boom, but also leading retreats out in Danville, San Damiano Retreat Center, which is very close to where we grew up. And really realized that there was something going on there where I was talking about what you needed to buy, from a philosophical perspective all day. And then I'd go lead retreats on the weekend where I'd tell people how to decompress from this. So kind of fast forward a few years, I got married and, I had a kid and then got married, but, got into the space of my life where I was, starting a family and wanted something really different. And was really tired by being in the in-between space of selling, but then how do we decompress? So I started a life coaching certification program, which was very, very helpful for many things. And in that meantime, I realized, hey, if I want to market this new business, this thing that I do, how could I talk about this in a way that's compelling? And that I'd been in love with podcasts since 2004. Who knew? They literally started on your iPod and, you download them like an old Palm Pilot. Kind of download, and I'd take them with me on Caltrain into the city and get pumped up for the next day. And I really felt like there was something about podcasting that was so, it's intimate, right? You're in somebody's ears and you get to know the hosts really well. And that seemed like a really fascinating way to spread more messages of transformation and that kind of thing for people in a way that's really easy, it's accessible, it's fun, and that's where Jumpstart Your Joy started, and that's how I got into podcasting.
I love it. And what is your show about? I mean, I get what it's probably about, but truly, what is it about?
Well, it's about the stories of people who have found their way to choose joy, even in hard times and difficult situations. And it started a little bit more around the cornerstone quote for my show is by a theologian named Henry Nouwen, who was from Yale, but I didn't study with him. And that is, joy is a choice, and we must keep choosing it. And I love this because it kind of aligns with Sparkle Every Day. Like it comes up with this idea that joy is out there. It is something that we can choose. It doesn't just happen to us. And that we have to actively and mindfully choose it every day, and sometimes more than once a day. I went through a really long time in my life where I played this kind of game with myself of when I was making decisions was I would ask myself mindfully, am I making this decision out of love or out of fear? And if love was the answer, then I could go ahead and do it. If it was fear for any reason, and that could come from fear of missing out, that could come from, people judging me, that could come from anything, then I'd be like, I got to think on this. And that's that kind of the gap moment decision that I feel like we can make about joy, and that this quote also reflects, because there are so many momentary choices in the day, and you can choose joy through almost all of them. And that's not to say that there's not some things that we need to take care of, like putting out the trash or just day-to-day things that may not feel joyful that we need to do so that we can have other joy. But that's where the show started and what it's about. And I've been really lucky to be able to speak to some very interesting people, yourself included. But like Danny Wood of New Kids on the Block and Allison Arngrim of Little House on the Prairie. She played Nellie Olson. And it's just been fascinating because I find that a lot of people have had a point in their life where they hit something that's really hard. And they may not realize it in the moment, but they're choosing a proactive way to get through it. Like they see, this brings me to a quote that's one of my favorites by Meg Cabot, who wrote The Princess Diaries. But it is that it's that courage is not the absence of fear, but that there is something more important than the fear. And people encounter that all the time. Fertility patients encounter that all the time. And it's that thing. So for Danny Wood, he lost his mother to breast cancer, and his decision through a hard time was to start an organization that now is Remember Betty. That's his mom's name. And he pays, he takes money into the foundation, and then he helps people pay for expenses that are related to cancer treatment. So he didn't go for the side that's research, which is totally important, but he went to the thing that he saw. He was solving the problem that he saw, and the hurt and the angst and the trial that he lived through, which is how could I have supported my own mom through this thing, which I get a little emotional just thinking about it because it's so beautiful. But that's the thing. And so I found that those stories were super prevalent. Everybody at some point in their life has hit that moment where they felt like, ooh, this is it. Like this thing that I'm in is no longer acceptable to me, and I want to find a way through it. And I feel like that's when joy or the universe, whatever you want to call it, is calling to us. And so I often call joy a way-finding emotion because it helps us see our way through to what is more possible beyond what the hard thing is right now.
So Paula, what I'm going to ask you right now is, what was your moment?
So I had a very long labor. It was 56 hours. And then I had an emergency C-section. And then he was in the NICU for a week. And so I went home without the kiddo. And it was highly traumatic. And I could feel, after he was home, and he's fine. And he's a great kiddo. He's 10 now. But I could feel that in the moments after he was home and things were getting back to normal, that things were not normal, and that I was having a really hard time. You can tell I'm a naturally happy, joyful person, but that I could not connect to that. And that disconnect for me was really upsetting. And I really went through the process of trying to figure out what's going on here. How do I get help for it? And how am I going to get back to being that really happy person that I want to be for this kid and that I want to be as a mom? And so I did go it took a long time to figure out the right person to speak to. And I think that's important to note. If you're going through anything similar, is find the right person. And then I went through therapy and things got easier, and I was diagnosed with postpartum PTSD. And so that was my moment. And I felt like, and that's kind of the nugget that I try and find in the show is this: how can I help inspire someone if they are in that moment of, this is the hardest thing that I've ever been through, and I want to find my way to the other side, and I don't know how to do it. And it's really important to share those stories, because that is like the hardest thing, is you need help, or you want help, or you want to get through it, and you don't know how. And so that was my story, and that's the nugget inside the show. And I don't talk about it every week or anything, but that's why I wanted to make the show. And that was my moment, and that was my transformation.
So is that where you're pulling a lot of your inspiration from when you're talking about jumpstarting your joy?
Yeah, it really is, because I think people, one, there's like a lot of compassion around anybody that's in that moment. And when they're ready and want to tell their story, which is interestingly what my therapist at the time, she's like, someday you're going to talk about this story, and I want you to. And I'm like, at that time I was like, oh no, like that's ripping the Band-Aid off. Like, but I'm ready now. So here it is. But it helps to understand the really hard place that somebody might be in. And it makes me, I think then I can listen for the things when I'm interviewing someone that makes it unique, and maybe is like, ooh, tell me more about that. But in a way that's really compassionate and that can help them and help other people. So, yeah.
So, a lot of my patients deal with PTSD from fertility treatments that don't work, but also, traumatic experiences with pregnancies that end too early, or delivery stories like, experiences that you've had. What are some things that people can do who've experienced trauma? What can they do to heal?
Such a great question. I think some of the best things are actually pretty simple, right? Like, one of them is acknowledge that whatever you're feeling is real. I think oftentimes when you hit a space of trauma, you're feeling like there's a lot of fear that comes up because it feels so unusual and different. And what you've been through is traumatic. So there's that, the actual experience of it. And then there's where you're at after the fact. And so I think acknowledging that this is real, and then looking, like I said, for the right person. And I think that comes out in a couple of different ways. Share what you're feeling with someone as soon as you are able. And I would mean that by being like a partner or a spouse, a family, a sister, a brother, someone that you feel like you can share, and that it's going to hold the space. I know, Amy, you talk about, sometimes the best, I don't know exactly how you put it, but you need to find someone who can really listen and not need to interject too much or give you advice, because a lot of times it's just getting that first telling out. And then maybe find a few more of those people, so you have more people to talk to around you and that know your story, and they kind of know how they can help support you. And then find your right therapist. That was one of the really hard parts of my own journey, is I actually got admitted, or was invited to join a postpartum depression group as an inpatient, as an outpatient person. And in my gut, and I know you talk a lot about intuition as well, I knew, they even said, and I knew it, I was like, well, okay, one, here we are. This is serious. I've just been admitted to this kind of a group. And two, okay, but I don't think this is the right thing. And so I kept going, and I ended up, maybe this is a possibility for some people. You often get connected with like a social worker as you leave the hospital, and they tell you, because I didn't know who to call or like what in the world is going on. And I called the social worker, and they started giving me some of the information. So that might be a place to go. I know there's also postpartum.net, which I think has some resources on it. And then you could also call, there's a lot of, places that offer like birth classes or whatever, and they also have a lot of resources. They're really well connected. Or your doctor. Like, it was also really important to me to talk to the person that had helped deliver and then do the C-section, because I really needed some sort of closure. And so I think when you're ready, if you've had kind of any kind of traumatic medical experience, I know that I had a really hard time remembering the actual events. And part of me needed to know it. Now, I don't know if everybody will be that way, but it's helpful to at least speak to the doctor and ask them about what happened, and ask what you need to know. and have a, just a discussion about it, especially if you're going to continue care with them or whatever, to let them know where you've been and what you've experienced. And then on the flip of it, I would say, like, I've done a lot of really interesting conversations with people about grief, because I feel like joy and grief are like bookends of the same kind of extreme emotions. And it's been so fascinating. I talked to Dr. Julia Samuel, and she is a psychotherapist out of Britain and was, interestingly enough, best friends with Princess Diana. But she started a really, I'll find the name of it, but she started a group that was all about grief and grieving. And one of the things that she shared in our conversation was about how that when she's working with people that are in deep grief, that she encourages them to go find things that are easy and that bring them joy, and like to reconnect with the things that are joyful to them, because you can't be in the state of like grief and hardship all the time. It's too much. It's too much. And so she was even talking about like some of the things she'll do is like, she just goes and binge watches TV, like the things we all do, but like we have to remember to make time for it. So I think those are some of the ways.
Thank you for sharing that. And then now you have this amazing book. And, I want you to show us the cover.
It's right here. Jumpstart Your Joy.
Jumpstart Your Joy. And your book and this last season of your podcast have been all about finding joy in the messy middle. What is that about, and what drew you to this topic?
Yeah, I love the messy middle. So the messy middle, just to define that, because it might not be a term, I didn't invent it. I'll own up to that. I first heard it on on a blog that was all about home improvement, and I think the description it's Young House Love, and Sherry talks about like when you're redoing your kitchen and you are in the middle. That's transformation, right? So it's kind of an apt metaphor here, but like you plan, you have all these great ideas about how this thing is going to go, and then near the middle, you've probably torn out everything. The floors are gone. You realize there's something that didn't go right. And you're in the messy middle. You like can't really remember you have a picture of it probably, but you can't really remember what it looked like when you started. And, mentally, you can't quite visualize what this mess is going to look like when you've got everything ready for the big reveal. And it's that space. And we find ourselves in that space constantly in life. I mean, we even see it in, the great works of the Bible or whatever, like when the people go out, when Moses leads them out of Egypt, go back to my religious studies roots, but for 40 years out in the wilderness, well, there's the messy middle. And I think we find ourselves there, and that's probably why it's included in these great texts. And so that's the space. Like, what do we do when we can't right now? So here's the nod to why I wrote it right now, but like we can't really see or recall what probably we can't do the things that we did in December of 2019. And yet we don't know what on the other side this is going to look like, getting through a pandemic, when it's all said and done, what this will look like. And so we're in the messy middle right now. We don't know what this is going to look like. And I love the stories that come out of this time. One, because I've been through a messy middle myself. And I think transformation is possible when we lean into what happens in the messy middle. And I think people are oftentimes, it's very hard for you to find joy when you're in this, because you're so preoccupied with the very real things of living a life during this time. Some of them are, the very basics of how do we get food or water or toilet paper. Like all those things became very real when we first started out, last year or a year ago. And now we're probably easing into it a little bit more. But how do we find joy right now when so many of the things that we love are, movies and those kinds of things aren't really possible in that? But those might have been our go-tos.
Yeah. And what are some of those ways that people can find joy in this messy middle?
A great question. So it's interesting, after speaking, I have over 280 episodes on the show, and some of the ways. So my first question, as you know, is, what were your earliest sparks of joy? What brought you joy as a child? And I think one of the easiest ways to find joy right now is to think about that for yourself if you haven't, and find the current version of it. And so if you're kind of stuck right there and you're like, I don't know, because some people actually don't recall what brought them joy as a child. Here's the top 5 answers on the board. But reconnecting or connecting with friends in some way. And obviously you could do that over Zoom or a phone call or a distance walk if you wanted. Reading. So many people said reading. And I think it's so beautiful because it can take us away, to the secret garden or to Prince Edward Island with Anne of Green Gables. Like you can go a million places, and that's really fun. Animals. Now that one might be a little bit harder if you don't own a pet, but webcams. This is joyful. You could go look at, I think, is it Sophia the hippo in the Cleveland Zoo? You could go watch an animal for a little while and just enjoy them. Creativity of any sort is always very, like people really enjoy creativity and like trying something new. And then I don't think I said this last one, but it's taking a walk, being in nature. And that actually does really, they've studied it. I don't know who they are, but it's been studied that, taking a walk in nature, they even call it like a nature bath. Who knows? But like it helps reset your entire nervous system and for you to be more open to like kind of the good vibes and all that. So I think you could try one of those or all of them.
Love it. So you can take your dog on a walk in nature while watching a hippo on your webcam, read a book when you get home, but you can also call maybe a friend at the same time. You can do it. It's like a fiver. I love it. And you talk about a couple of different kinds of joy in the book. And anytime I think about, it's hard for me. I always am thinking about fertility. So when I see bed in a bag, I'm just like, ooh, can someone get pregnant in that bag? But can you tell me about bed in a bag? What does that mean? And how is that a version of joy?
I love this one so much. So kind of when the pandemic hit, I realized that some of the things that I was missing were the things that we go to that are kind of the prepackaged versions of joy. And I want to be super clear, like I'm not judging these, like we need them and they're really popular for a reason. So when I say this, prepackaged versions of joy, which I'll explain the bed in the bag part in just a second, but like, so those are the things that are easy. Like we go to a movie, we go to, if you're maybe like I don't know where I'm going with this. We'll have to cut that part. But a movie, or you might go to a Disneyland or an amusement park or a cruise or a vacation that you've planned, and or you just get away from for the day and you go do something and you go, and these are the bed in a bag versions of joy because you go. Everything you need is provided. It's neat. It's prepackaged, and you can enjoy the heck out of it. And it is a total delight when we go into Target and we're like, ooh, look at that bed in a bag. You bring it home, you put all the pillows and the sham and the bedspread and the dust ruffle, and you're like, it's like a little mini makeover. And like, it's the best feeling. But I think we do that too with these bed in a bag versions of joy. And the thing that I've noticed is it's great, right? We love going to the movie. We love going to Disneyland. But we don't always reintegrate those things into our lives. So, we go on the vacation, but we don't always bring the pieces of the vacation we love home. And so how do we do that? Because it got then to be in the messy middle, in the pandemic, where we can't access those things. So what I started doing was I was thinking about, I wish I could go to Disneyland, or I wish I could go wherever. What do I love about Disneyland? Kind of similar about like, what are how did you find joy as a child? But like, well, what do I love? Well, what I love feeling like I'm pampered, kind of, because customer service there is like, they just love the heck out of you there. I love being able to find gluten-free food because I'm gluten-free wherever I want and feeling like I can eat whatever I want. I love just feeling like it's an adventure. And so how can I bring those things into my life right now and support myself in a way right now that would make me feel a little bit more joyful? And I think it's an interesting thing because then I'm reintegrating. We talk about that in retreat work, which I also do. But like, how do we integrate the things that we have learned and that we love into right now instead of just leaving it at the retreat? How do we bring it back into our life? So I don't think it's just the bed in a bag versions of joy that we kind of hold outside of ourselves. And I know you even talk about this too, is like planning your pregnancy and all that is like planning a really great trip. It's that same kind of thing. Like, how do we plan it and enjoy it, everything in the now, and take joy from what we can do now instead of it just letting it sit out there. And then the other kind of joy is the kind of joy that we notice every day and that we can sink into. And it might be noticing truly like a beautiful flower, or I have a ridiculously large artichoke plant right out this window. That thing is pretty joyful. And I can see what it's about to send me, artichokes. But just like soaking that goodness up. And when you notice it, take the moment to even like make a mental snapshot. Where am I? What does this feel like? And you can go back to those moments anytime you want. Like I have a few that if I'm in it, meaning, and it's a hard day and I'm like, ooh, like can shut my eyes and I could be back in Italy with my mom, or I can shut my eyes and think of that artichoke plant. Like, it doesn't have to be big, right? It can be whatever, and you can revisit them.
Do you have suggestions for easy ways people can bring more joy into their daily life?
I mean, we talked about the 5 ways that you could do that, based on what you know from being a kid. And I think a lot of it just takes being super mindful and getting into the practice of noticing joy, and also defining what it means to you. I think since joy is one of those things, it's an extreme emotion. A lot of people kind of back off on it, right? We as a society are not really good with the extreme emotions. So we don't like grief sometimes, and we feel a little intimidated by joy. And so I think part of it is noticing when you feel joy and let yourself feel it. And I think that's really important, especially when you're in overwhelming situations. I imagine that way with a fertility patient as well. Like, where am I seeing joy? And then leaning in to do more of that. However you can bring it into your life is super important. And I think experiencing joy and having worked with it, it's so funny to say, over 6 years, some sort of a joy expert. Oh, that seems really silly to me. But once you start to notice joy, you can't help but notice more of it. It's like anything where you put your attention to something, it really does become easier to spot it everywhere. It becomes easier to acknowledge what is joyful to you. And I think that's a really important thing to notice too. So it's kind of like, some people call it a joy practice, but I mean, I don't know if it's really a practice. It's just getting really comfortable with experiencing it and inviting other people into it too. Like maybe you could plan out something that you can do that's physically distanced, and you can look forward to it on your calendar and get your family or your friends or whoever is dear to you involved. And then that's a fun day out too.
And I also think joy has a lot to do with gratitude.
Yeah.
And, saying thank you and being mindful of recognizing how appreciative, like I am so appreciative for you each and every day. And I just can't say thank you enough. But I have to make sure, I'm like, am I thanking Paula enough? Like, I need to make sure that she knows how much I adore, appreciate her, and how your joy is also contagious. And so, because then, you help me bring other people joy through the podcast, through the shows that we do, then I have just so much gratitude for you. And then I can continue to be joyful, because I know that sounds like I'm going round and round, but it truly is contagious.
Yeah. It is contagious. And I think, and thank you, because I adore working with you, and I adore that we both kind of exude this kind of appreciation for joy and for, in your words, kind of more about like, how can we sparkle every day? I think those energies are so similar. And I think when people start to set that as the precedent of how they approach things, it shifts everything. Because when you can come from a place of gratitude for between us, like for each other and for patients or for clients, like it changes everything and people feel it. And I think if people can start to do that in their own lives, they're also going to see the people around them notice, and they want to be more involved, and they want to, it's a whole thing, because it really is choosing a different way. It's choosing to be really open and really loving, and it's a different kind of a way of being.
It is. You're like the match to my sparkle, or you're the spark to my sparkle. So where can people find your book and your podcast?
Well, the website is jumpstartyourjoy.com, and the book is right in the top navigation. And the podcast itself is everywhere you can find a podcast. So it's Apple or Spotify or Amazon. And the book is on Amazon too. If folks want to order it there, it's you can get it with Prime if you want it.
I love it. Well, thank you, Paula, for being on the show, for sharing your message of joy. And I love everything about your message. And I hope that people will follow and listen and learn from your podcast so that they can not be afraid of being joyful. I think there's, like joy guilt? There's like joy shame, where it's like we kind of are made to feel guilty almost by being happy right now. And I get it. Like people are really suffering, but I think for our own mental health, it's okay to be joyful.
Yeah, it really is. That is so well said. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you, Paula. I love you. Bye.
Love you too.
Welcome to the Egg Whisperer Show, a program exclusively designed to promote reproductive health awareness and discuss fertility preservation options. Here is your host, the Harvard-educated fertility specialist, Dr. Amy.
She's known as the Egg Whisperer.
Fertility expert Dr. Amy Abazadeh.
And you have yet another success story just launched by an East Bay fertility doctor.